So thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Naomi Reinharz. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the American Society of the University of Haifa. Thank you for signing back on to those who were patiently waiting. We have hundreds of people live on Zoom and many more on Facebook. We're really glad that you could be with us today for an emergency webinar with Dubi Weissglas, who's the chair of the executive committee at the University of Haifa. He's also the former Director General of the Prime Minister's office under former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. We do these webinars every couple of months. This is an unusual time and a very important time in Israel and for the global Jewish community and global community at large. So we wanted to have this webinar with our very special guest today in light of what's going on in Israel. Our thoughts and minds and prayers and our hearts are in Israel while it's fighting this very difficult but important war. Dubi Weissglas has a very high level of expertise. He'll provide us with very timely insights surrounding the war in Israel, which is, as you know, a situation that unfolds and evolves literally every minute. As the former Director General of the Prime Minister's office under Ariel Sharon, Dubi was one of the key architects of the Israeli disengagement from Gaza. He also served as a diplomatic delegate for negotiating with U.S. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice and with U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell. Today, as I said, Dubi is chair of the executive committee of University of Haifa. In the aftermath of the unprecedented Hamas assaults on Israel on October 7th, Dubi will shed light on the current conflict from his perspective as a key government advisor during the withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, and how that major decision has impacted the region today. I know that we have a lot of questions in the chat. As I said earlier, you can put your questions and comments in the Q&A. We will get to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. We may go over after 1 p.m., given that we had to start late. This webinar is being recorded for all of you who want to share it and view it later. I also would be remiss if I didn't explain what University of Haifa is doing at this time to support its community. University of Haifa has almost 18,000 students and, of course, many hundreds of faculty, all of whom are impacted by this war. We have started a President's Emergency Fund, which will provide relief for the people of Israel who are most in need at this time. We've already raised more money than ever for this fund. Your donation will go 100% to provide the hundreds of University of Haifa student soldiers who are serving and defending our country with the financial assistance that they need at this critical time. As some of you may know, half of University of Haifa students are first generation in their family to go to college, and many come from economically challenging backgrounds to begin with. So you can imagine what they're dealing with at this time on top of everything going on. And your generous financial support is even more crucial. We will put a link to donate in this chat, as well as on Facebook Live. If you have any questions about how to get involved with the American Society of the University of Haifa, please email us at info@asuh.org or write in the chat or connect with us after this webinar. So now, without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Dubi Weissglas to all of our listeners and viewers today. Please give him your full attention, and you can continue to put questions and comments in the chat throughout the webinar. So Dubi, thank you again for your time. I know there's a lot going on for you and for the state of Israel, so thank you for taking an hour to be with us today. We really appreciate it. I'd like to start with the first question. How did Israel find itself in a position that led to the October 7th terrorist attack, and where it now finds itself fighting not only on one front, but potentially 2 or 3 fronts in the state of Israel?
First of all, for everybody, thank you very much for attending this meeting. We have here plenty of questions. I don't think that we have even a beginning of possibility to provide with all the answers. And this is mainly related to your first question. I don't know the answer, how Israel found itself in this humiliating position, in such a loss of human life, in such a miserable way, where people were burnt alive, bodies were mutilated, whole families were exterminated. I don't know. Nothing seems to work. There was no intelligence indication whatsoever, though, I emphasize, though, Hamas prepared this operation for almost a year. It meant 3,000 people who were well preparing themselves. You know, some of those murderers were captured by our forces. It was found they were equipped with booklets, contains very detailed map of the targets, instruction, all kind of directions how to deal with this Israeli fancy equipment, whether it's the surveillance system, whether it's the communication system. And as I said, that was prepared for almost a year, 3,000 people, and yet no single indication in whether it's in our SIGINT center, I mean, not something which is parallel to NSO, nothing. Secondly, this very fancy security fence that was built around the Gaza border with something between 3 to 4 billion shekels investment was pulled down with kind of a shovel dozer, which is, I think, is a 40 years old model. The military appeared on the scene between 4 to 6 hours later. Those fancy choppers that we received from the United States was shown up in the air. And again, it was enough, 1 or 2 of them, to bring an end to this massacre in a period of time that could save the life of 100 people. I'm sure that all these will be thoroughly investigated, and I do hope that all the right conclusions will be taken by, you know, I was 10 years old during the Sinai War in 1956, but I clearly remember this war. I surely remember the 6-Day War, which I was in active duty. Also the Yom Kippur War. I can guarantee I cannot recall a situation which is so painful, so miserable, so embarrassing, the kind that we are now with all these questions and almost without an answer. As to the second front, Naomi, the Hezbollah, which is a military force incomparable to Hamas, and which pose a very, very, I would say, existential threat to Israel. Well, according to our intelligence evaluation, the Hezbollah possess between 100 to 200,000 missiles, many of them aimed into strategic centers all over Israel because they are in the range that covers the entire country. And of course, a full-scale war with Hezbollah could be very, very harmful. Yet, we strongly believe, but again, we see this, all our guesses are good for nothing, as unfortunately the reality has just shown up. But we strongly believe that Iran, which is the real power behind Hezbollah, consider Hezbollah as their doomsday weapon vis-a-vis Israel, if Israel ever will attack Iran. So we have the feeling that they are not going to waste this one bullet to save Gaza, because they do not really care about the Palestinians, but they would prefer to keep the threat of Hezbollah, as I said, as a way to prevent Israel from taking any military action against Iran itself. That's why for the last 2 weeks, we see Hezbollah sort of warming up the border between us and Lebanon. There is exchange of fire, there is a sort of low-profile friction, if I may use the term, but it seems that they will not start with a full-scale war, and as of course, we will not react, because the last thing that Israel would willingly got into is a war on two fronts. But as I said, now everybody's waiting. Civil society in Israel behave in the most impressive manner in terms of volunteering, collective guarantee, as people helping each other. Actually, it seems that the most of the Israeli society now is busy in helping each other for this very sad reason that our government disappeared. Our government simply doesn't function when it comes to the management of this emergency time, whether it's the financial support, social support, transportation. We have over 150,000 Israelis who are displaced. We are refugees in our countries. The inhabitants of Ashkelon, part of the entire villages, what was left out of them, around Gaza, and up north, Kiryat Shmone, where people were removed to the central part of the country. The poor darlings are there with their families. They don't know who's going to cover the bills. It's as much as the government is concerned, it is a total mess. Luckily, as I said, civil society, volunteering organization, professional unions help, assist, raise money, raise goods, and miracles, which you all know, it's a very sort of typical Middle Eastern commodity, apparently also help us somehow to maintain life.
Thank you for your answer. As a key advisor for the Sharon government during the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005, can you tell us a little bit about what discussions looked like before the disengagement from Gaza, and what happened over the last 18 years? What did or did not happen, looking in hindsight since 2005?
Okay. Ariel Sharon, whom I worked with, whom I loved for so many years. Actually, I've met him the first time as part of my military service at the Judge Advocate General of the IDF in 1982, when this commission of inquiry with regard to the events in Sabra and Shatila was appointed, and I was drafted for reserve service to assist him in this commission. Since then, we had very close relationship. In 2002, after a year in his position as a prime minister, he asked me to join him as his bureau chief, which of course I did. Ariel Sharon started his term as a typical Likud leader with a typical Likud political ideas and Likud ideology. But since he was very much connected to realities, and the political agenda or the public agenda was very low on the scale of his priorities, he understood in a very short period of time that we must find a way to reach a political solution with the Palestinians. He understood that this ongoing conflict will take us nowhere, and I say it very mildly because you already seen where it took us 2 weeks ago. There was a huge change in his views, in the way he perceived the realities, and finally, it was materialized in 2 major moves. One of them is the withdrawal in Gaza, which I will relate very soon, and the second one, this understanding the Likud, with the Likud ideology, with the right-wing perception, is not the proper political platform to go on with our political agenda, and therefore he retired from the Likud and formed a new party, otherwise known as Kadima, which was supposed to become the political basis for our next plans vis-a-vis Judea and Samaria. And since we worked very close with the American administration, the American administration, the US, as well as the European Union and the rest of the world community have worked a program otherwise known as the Roadmap for Peace. The Roadmap for Peace, it's not a peace plan in the sense that it doesn't have a content. It's more a managerial plan. Actually, it's a program how to manage, how to run the peace process. And the first part of this plan dealt mainly with the duty of the Palestinian to work on themselves, to endorse them into law-abiding, well-functioning society, and only then, if this goal ever been reached, to enter into a stage of what we call the final status negotiation or a political negotiation. As part of this program, it was the US who marginalized Arafat. It was the US who convinced the Palestinian society to bring Mahmoud Abbas, otherwise known as Abu Mazen, from Doha, where he stayed, and to become the Palestinian Prime Minister. And it was done clearly to, as I say, to marginalize and to neutralize Arafat. They were behind the appointment of Dr. Salam Fayyad, a Palestinian who spent over 20 years in the United States in a very high-ranked positions in the financial world, to become the Minister of Finance. And one of those two assumed responsibility over the Palestinian Authority, or then the second Intifada started to end. Now, I would like, the second Intifada from 2000 to 2005 caused the death of 1,188 Israelis. About 70% out of them lost their life in those suicidal attacks. And to be very honest with everybody, the Israeli Empire then, was all its extraordinary capabilities with the F-15, F-16, its technologies, found itself totally helpless against a young Palestinian who turned himself into a bomb. This explosive vest, it's a piece of rag sewn to create 6 pockets, 3 pockets stuffed with homemade explosive, 3 pockets stuffed with sharp metal parts. He was requested to come to Allenby Street in Tel Aviv. I said Allenby Street because Allenby Street is a major lane of buses. To come on board on a bus. Buses in Israel, as you all know, are tightly closed, whether winter or summer. To go into the back part of the bus, facing the direction of the movement, and to explode himself while he stands. And the reason is to ensure that the spray of those sharp metal parts will meet with passenger's neck. Over 60% of suicidal attacks victims were beheaded. And we found ourselves totally helpless vis-a-vis this phenomena, because again, those kids, by the way, a high percentage, over 50% of suicidals were kids with a variety of social pathological issues, whether it is, sort of retardedness, disability, gaze, girls who were, romantically involved. The weakest elements of Palestinian social fabric, kids who knew that their life will not last normally. And the proposition they had from the militants is you either die for nothing or you die for $15,000. That was the payment and a full coverage of the mourning expenses. We found in the Muqatta later on during the defensive operation, when we entered the capital of Palestinian terrorland, we found those little notes known in Arabic, it's like a will, where the operator of this poor kid could state the many number of family-sized Coca-Cola bottles that the family will receive after death to cover. When Sharon realized, and it was sort of a very painful process because every other day we had 15 here and 20 here, and buses exploded here, and restaurants exploded there, that this conflict must end. We cannot win them. We cannot get rid of them. Despite our dreams, whenever we go up the mountain, looking east, they were not plans to disappear, as we don't have any plans to disappear. So the first step was withdrawal from Gaza. Gaza is not part of Eretz Israel. It was not mentioned in the Bible. It was not promised to Abraham. It was, in a way, sort of a teeny tiny island of 7,000 settlers sitting in the heart of the poorest, crowded, miserable place on earth. But in this very opportunity you gave me, the linkage, of course, it became a very political issue between the withdrawal from Gaza and the rise of Hamas. It's nonsense, because I would like to remind you that the IDF, the military, withdrew from Gaza in '94 as part of the Oslo Pact. After the Oslo agreements were executed, the first pulse of the Oslo agreement was known as Gaza and Jericho first. And the reason Gaza and Jericho was the first target for withdrawal was two reasons. From Gaza, it was the IDF who wanted not to withdraw, just to get the hell out of there. And second, Jericho, because Jericho always has been a very quiet and peaceful area. It was 1994 when the Israeli IDF left Gaza, when they withdrew from the cities, from the villages, from the refugee camps, and a limited number of soldiers sort of circled the Israeli settlements just to protect them, but there was no military presence in the populated areas of Gaza. Therefore, in June 2007, when Hamas took over Gaza, in one of the bloodiest, typically Palestinian bloodshed, that about 5,000 terrorists of the Hamas killed and put out over 15,000 Palestinian security people. Many of them ended their life in the most typical cruel way. The Israeli military wasn't inside. If the government of Israel then felt like intervening into this internal bloodshed, nothing prevented them. I mean, the Israeli army could enter Gaza not necessarily from inside. You can enter Gaza also from the outside. The distance is the same distance. So there is no connection whatsoever between the disengagement from Gaza and the rise of Hamas. People might think also, I don't think so, but people might think that it is the Oslo Agreement, which is 30 years ago, that took our military out of Gaza, but not the if not Almighty, who somehow decided to take Arik to him, we would continue with similar moves in Judea and Samaria, not necessarily at the same scale, but we would do what possibly can be done to find a political solution with the Palestinians. And there will be no political solution with the Palestinians without a withdrawal. The two-state solution, a political that was firstly raised by President George W. Bush in his famous speech on June 24, 2002, called for a two-state solution. We strongly supported the idea. We brought it to the government. On May 2003, the Israeli government adopted the two-state solution, and we did our best to try to realize it. We had an incredibly good set of relationship with the Palestinian Authority. We met Abbas and his staff on a monthly basis. Sharon liked him, trusted him. Cooperation was unbelievable militarily, intelligently, economically. And that's how the Second Intifada ended. I know that at least in Israel, because everything's politics, all is politics. The notion, the simple notion is the defense shield operation, which was a large-scale, very successful military operation, brought an end to the Palestinian terrorism. Not true. The defense shield operation took place on April-May 2002. Until defense, as I said, if we had 1,200, more or less, casualties dead in the Second Intifada, half of them lost their life before defensive operation, and half of them after it. What brought an end to the Second Intifada is the Palestinian efforts, is these large-scale reforms done by Abbas and Salam Fayyad with Palestinian security forces. They discharged over 8,000 security personnel, as Salam Fayyad once called them, all-time rotten Fatah gooks. They recruited 8,000 new ones with a massive American support led by General Dayton, who spent 2 years in our region. They trained these people and they endorsed them into very effective, efficient police force, and terrorism almost disappeared. I say almost. Institutional terrorism disappeared. Well, of course, here and there, you have one crazy Palestinian with a knife, another crazy Palestinian with a rifle. But the kind of terrorism we faced between 2002 until 2005, a terrorism that is financed by the Palestinian Authority, terrorism which involves Palestinian officials, Palestinian security personnel, that's completely disappeared. After Sharon's sickness and later death, Ehud Olmert, as you all know, became the Prime Minister. He continued these efforts along these lines, was very close to close a political settlement with the Palestinians. But then, as everybody remembers, due to his legal problems and the trial, he had to resign. 2009 election, Netanyahu took office. And this entire approach, this entire notion has turned 180 degrees backwards. And I'll try to make it short because I can talk about it a week. If Olmert's policy, Sharon policy, was not policy, I mean attitude, understanding, is that Hamas is a group of crazy militant, extremely people who believes that what they call the infidels, the non-believers, has no right to contaminate with their feet the holy soil of the Holy Land, and I'm quoting now from Hamas Charter. And we consider them as the worst enemy ever Israel faced, and yet the Palestinian Authority, perceived by us as a potential partner, which still requires a lot of work, a lot of negotiation, a lot of changes, a lot of reforms, a lot of, but potentially the Palestinian Authority, since the Oslo Agreement, did recognize the state of Israel within the 67 borders, and stated time and again its willingness and its readiness to enter into a peace agreement with Israel in their own conditions that many of them are unacceptable, but in principle, the willingness was there. Hamas, which is typically a radical Islamic approach, consider the infidels. And when I say infidels, it's not necessarily the Jews or the Americans, the infidels. See what happened September 11, the rest of the world, the infidels. Mr. Netanyahu has completely, as I said, turned his priorities. The Palestinian Authority became Israel's enemy number one, and Hamas became a friend, but because of the animosity between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, on the biblical perception of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, he totally disconnected any relationship with the Palestinian Authority other than some security coordination which still goes beneath. And yet, a lot of thoughts and efforts were invested how to contain a relationship with Hamas. Like how you raise a crocodile in your living room. You have sometimes to feed him, sometimes to pull his tail, sometimes to beat him. And to a great extent for him, life with Hamas, it's like a malaria, you know, it goes, it comes and goes, and that's the way it's handled for the last 9 years. About 5 or 6 years ago, it's, everybody knows, after Hamas took over Gaza, it was the Palestinian Authority continued to finance the civil administration in Gaza. In other words, 44,000 government employees in Gaza, teachers, policemen, engineers, whatever, were paid by the Palestinian Authority. As well, the Palestinian Authority purchased gasoline, oil, electric power, water from Israel. All bills were paid by Ramallah, by the PA. I don't remember the year, whether it was 2014 or 15, but something in this neighborhood. Mr. Abbas decided is enough, and he doesn't pay anymore for Gaza. In 3 weeks, Gaza economically collapsed. No salaries, no power, no electricity, no water, and yet nothing to do with us. I had some working relationship with a Gazan lawyer, a fellow who was educated in the United States. I remember I called him those days just when I read in the papers about what's happening in Gaza to ask him how he is. So he said, how am I? I found, he said, something very interesting, that I can start my car without gasoline, but I use, he said, brute. I mean, he used his aftershave to feel his, Gaza was about to die. The Hamas crawling on his knees, begging, crying for Egyptian help. Its representative met the Palestinian Authority representative in Cairo, and after long negotiation, it was agreed that the Palestinian Authority will assume back control over Gaza. The agreement was just about to be concluded when the Qataris, the mother and the fathers of all sin, of all evil in the Middle East, appeared with this very generous offer to enter Gaza between $30 to $40 million monthly as a replacement for the PA money which stopped coming. Mr. Netanyahu, for reasons I do hope he will explain to the Commission of Inquiry that will be established, agreed, and as of then, Mr. Al-Madani, this is the Qatari courier. If everybody, once you will have a chance to be at the Hilton Tel Aviv, and maybe we'll meet there, I'll show you in the lobby. He is a great admirer of Hilton sushi. On every month, with his, in Russian, we call it chemedan, yes, with this suitcase, he enters Gaza, escorted by Israeli security, brings in between 40 to 50 million US dollars. And no wonder that Hamas has demonstrated on October 7 those incredible capabilities. With $50 million monthly, you can tame and train everybody. So once the opportunity of bringing the Palestinian Authority back to Gaza as the controlling power were lost from the reasons just indicated, we were left with them. And our intelligence and our government was busy all the time, as I said, how to find any possible formula of modus vivendi with them. And the reason, the political reason, because in Israel, everything is political. As Henry Kissinger said, Israel doesn't have a foreign policy. It's only internal policy, and our internal policy is it's only internal local politics. And as I said, and because the settlers, which are the overriding dominant political power over the Likud, which is the party in government, consider the Palestinian Authority as an ultimate enemy. As I said, given that any political solution with the Palestinian Authority may involve a withdrawal from settlements, some, many, little, all of them, issue which is inexisting with the Hamas. And Mr. Netanyahu, along this line, as I say, worked so-called all the time, how somehow. A week before this catastrophe, the massacre of October 7th, the mood amongst our intelligence, our cabinet, our government is Hamas is contained. They are mainly focusing on economy, employment opportunities in Israel, maybe to increase the many number of working permit in Israel, etc. So the likelihood that something of that will happen is very low. The same language which was used on the eve of Yom Kippur War.
Thank you.
Yes,
that was a very thorough answer. I appreciate that. We're getting literally dozens of questions. Obviously, we will be going after 1 o'clock, so I hope you can stay with us as long as we're able to keep Dubi.
Listen, I'm old retiree, and I can stay with you as long as you want. It's up to
perfect. You. All day. We'll take you out as long as
all week.
All week. Perfect.
All week.
Perfect. The questions would probably take all week to answer, even my questions alone, let alone everyone else's. I'm going to try to consolidate the questions as much as I can. Do you think that Hamas can be removed from power in the Gaza Strip? What does that look like? How long would that take, and what needs to happen for that to happen and for stability to return to Gaza, or quote unquote stability in Gaza?
Listen, I strongly believe that what worked in the past, I think the 2014-2015 crisis, that economically Gaza collapsed. 100,000 of angry and hungry Palestinians demonstrated in the street. The Hamas, as I say, begged that the responsibility of Gaza will be taken out of their hands. What the US as our mentors should do is, when the issue of reconstruction or recovery of Gaza will be relevant, not yet, because now it's still an active war. It is the international community led by the United States must set a clear condition. There is no recovery of Gaza. There is no reconstruction of Gaza unless it's done without Hamas, but under the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority. I have more than a feeling that it will not be an issue, because the last thing on earth that Hamas believe that they can reconstruct Gaza, given this huge phenomenal destruction that Gaza is undergoing. And if Israel could at least launch, could be behind, as I say, a kind of an agreement. Well, we cannot be involved directly, because the Palestinian Authority will never return to Gaza carrying on Israeli bayonets. That's what they say. But if the initiative would be international, if all those countries around the world who are willing to assist Gaza to recover will come and say, yes, we are willing, as I say, to restore life, but it will not happen with Hamas. It will take Hamas exactly 5 minutes to disappear, exactly the way it happened in 2004. But then the good brother Qataris, with our consent, came and saved them. If there will be no Qataris, no Turks, no Iranians to replace US or European assistance, Hamas will disappear. The Palestinian Authority, of course, they need tremendous help in all respects, in view of a challenge like destroyed Gaza, but that can be done. Now, to tell you that life next to the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, it is an afternoon, Saturday afternoon walk, it is not. But still, the level of security the Palestinian Authority gives Israel in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank, cannot be even compared to these devastating events that we have got from Gaza. In my view, this is the only solution. But I said, it requires a total political revolution in Israel, a different government, a different prime minister, and a different political council.
Thank you. I would say, as someone who's worked closely with the Bush administration when you were working with former Prime Minister Sharon, what is your assessment on how the Biden administration and Congress, along with him, have approached the conflict, as well as, in general, the U.S. response to the conflict as a whole?
Well, needless to say that the U.S. response, specifically those 2 aircraft carriers that were sent here, the Marines that are here, it was a very, very pleasant surprise. Personally, I must admit, I was not that surprised, because I happened to meet President Biden many times in the past when he was senator. I mean, there were very, very sort of pleasant relationship between him and Sharon. He visited us at the Prime Minister office many times, and we know him. He loves us. He loves Israel. He may be one of the few, but the last are not few. He belongs to a generation that still remember the ashes we came out from. And so I know he's going to be friendly. To be very honest, I didn't expect, or I didn't realize the dimensions of this support. Of course, in addition, on top of his real emotions and the real affections, he feels maybe a little bit that the faith of Israel now, in my view, is in very irresponsible hands. So as our all good mentor, he, in a way, helps us or defending us from ourselves. And we need a lot of this stuff. But in my view, no question that in the basis of the US attitude is this very deep emotions, as I say, of empathy, of affection he's having towards Israel. And previously, when we discussed the possibility of a second front or front in the north, there is no question that is the Gerald Ford, the aircraft carrier, which is sailing back and forth not far from the Syrian border, has a pretty good convincing power of deterrence over the Iranians. So I think that I'm not talking on behalf of the Israelis, of course, but would I be allowed to talk on behalf of Israel? We should express our deep feeling of gratitude and gratefulness to President Biden, to Anthony Blinken, and to the American leading team.
Thank you. This is a difficult question, I'm sure, to answer, but do you have any regrets or second thoughts about the disengagement in 2005? Was anything done incorrectly? Hindsight is 2020, of course. Is there anything we could have done back then or since then to have avoided this horrible situation?
Maybe I wasn't clear enough in my second question, but I tell you, since factually, it's a matter of fact, as I said, the Israeli military wasn't in Gaza in 2005. Maybe, in 2000, or it was in 2003, several civil rights organizations brought a motion to our Supreme Court against the methodology of targeted killing that was applied by the IDF in Gaza, by use of very fancy technologies. They claimed, the High Court, the Supreme Court, that this is an unlawful execution of people, without a due process, without this. With the Supreme Court, our Supreme Court, and it's this Supreme Court that during the last year was presented as one of the worst enemies of the Israeli society, but that Supreme Court ruled that the use of targeted killing in Judea and Samaria is unlawful. Why? Why? Because the Israeli military is deployed all over the area. And if somebody is suspected as a ticking bomb, namely is just about to commit an action of terrorism, they say, go ahead, knock on his door, arrest him. If he will resist arrest, I will shoot him in the head. But Gaza, that's how the Supreme Court ruled, is an entirely different matter. The Israeli army is no more in Gaza since 1994. And if in Khan Yunis, Rafah, Jabalia, Gaza, the city of Gaza, somebody now is building a bomb, there is no access. You cannot knock on his door. So the only effective, immediate, prime matter you have is a targeted killing, and targeted killing was approved in Gaza due to the fact that I've mentioned the military wasn't there. So in 2005, at the disengagement from Gaza, we pulled out the settlers, not the military, the civilians. And if I am right, and I'm right, and the Hamasi coup in Gaza would take place with or without the disengagement, and let's assume that we wouldn't leave Gaza, I wouldn't even think what would happen to 8,000 Israeli settlers sitting in the heart of Gaza, surrounded by 2.5 million savages, and you see. By now, if not all of them, many of them would be dead. So my conscience is sort of, and I know that very clear, we thought then that we must separate from the Palestinians. We thought then that the conflict, the Israel-Palestinian conflict takes us to hell, and the proof, I don't want to repeat it. And we believe that other than, well, to be unlike Judea and Samaria, with all its biblical context, spiritual context, cultural response, archaeology, views, it's 20 kilometers from Tel Aviv with all the geopolitical issues. Nothing of this stuff relates to Gaza. I mean, what for? And if we were convinced, and that's what happened, that sooner or later we will have to separate from the Palestinians, we believe that Gaza should be the first, because there was no reason to be in Gaza in the first place. And the fact that some Israeli governments have done this mistake in 1970, it's not a reason, to maintain this mistake for the rest of the days. So I wanted to save the life primarily of the settlers, life of the soldiers. And there was over 150 soldiers killed in Gaza until the engagement. To keep an area that everybody knows, every decent Israeli, right, left or center, will tell you that everybody understands that in any final status settlement, we won't be in Gaza. Like in 1977, we negotiated peace with the Egyptians. The issue was not who will keep Gaza. The issue was who will not keep Gaza. The Egyptians refused, and we had to keep it. So I don't have any second thought. Well, we couldn't predict two very sad developments, or three. One, it's the stroke of Ariel Sharon. Two, the legal complications of Ehud Olmert. And three, the weakness of the Palestinian Authority forces in Gaza, that in 2 hours, surrendered and escaped. Well, 100 of them were pushed down from the roofs. We are not surprised by what happened on October 7. If people are interested, we'll go into the archives and you will see those Palestinian security people captured by the Hamas wild beast. How is their eyes covered? They are tied with a rope, one to the other. They are taken on a roof, and then the first one is dropped down from the roof, and yet the rope takes the whole group down. This is Hamas. If we would stay in power, they wouldn't exist today, because we would do what possibly can done to get rid of them. And unfortunately, an Israeli Prime Minister and Israeli government, as of 2009, has decided entirely differently. As I already mentioned, I'm not going for it.
Thank you. I want to combine a couple questions that have come up a number of times in the chat, and it's on my mind as well. One, do you think that the Palestinian Authority, if it were to take over in Gaza, or Fatah, if it had taken over in Gaza, would things have been different? Are they really different? There's a lot of reports. Someone mentioned Memory. There's other organizations that track the Palestinian Authority. They also have been reportedly teaching terrorism in their schools. And some people say they're no different than Hamas. That's, I'm curious your thoughts on that. And the second question, many people have asked about Iran. What can we do about Iran? We know that Iran had a large hand to play in this. They will probably try other things in the future. Even if this war ends and we wipe out every Hamas terrorist that exists in the world, Iran probably will not stop trying to destroy Israel. So how do we handle Iran going forward?
Okay, so as you do your first question, as I said, the Palestinians are far from being ideal neighbors. Okay, this entire neighborhood we live is far from being ideal. So it's not an issue of making good decisions, but it's an issue of how to choose between the bad and the worst. So Hamas, it's an unhesitating situation. They are not the worst. They are axiomatically the worst. The Palestinian Authority tries hard, not necessarily succeed, but don't forget that from 2009 up to now, it's over 14 years, Israel does what the Israeli government to weaken the Palestinian Authority, to humiliate the Palestinian Authority, to not to keep any sort of relationship with the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinian people, the Palestinian crowd sees that Abu Mazen's peace vision didn't make too much good for the Palestinian society. Therefore, their public support is belittling, is shrinking. Now, if the attitude will change and Israel will invest more in strengthening the Palestinian Authority, in helping them to develop the necessary capabilities, life next to Gaza will be much better. It's not the relationship between Holland and Belgium, but will be much. So this is the only solution in my view. To your second question, Iran and Hamas. Iran and Hamas, it's a affiliation which is mainly based on, as I said, on this ancient principle of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Ethnically and culturally, the Iranians are Shiites, Hamas are Sunnis. There's not too much affection between those two groups. If Israel will succeed to solve the Palestinian issue, a great deal of the Iranian energy, hostile energy or energy of hostility will disappear, because even now, when those mass demonstrations in Tehran take place, what are they demonstrating? It's Haram al-Sharif. It's the temple in Jerusalem. The hostility of Iran cannot be the same once there is an Israeli-Palestinian political arrangement, because going back to the famous Saudi initiative from 2002, now the Arab League, there is an Arab League resolution which was reconfirmed 10 times, that once the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is satisfactorily ended, then the entire members of the Arab League will recognize the state of Israel, which will be followed by a recognition by the entire Islamic world. So Iran, as I say, the real allies of Iran in the region is Hezbollah. And as I previously mentioned, I do not think that Iran will waste the Hezbollah's horrifying capabilities for the Palestinians. They keep it as a measure of deterrence against Israel in their own context. For the day, if Israel will ever dare to attack Iran, then the answer will be given by Hezbollah by its 150,000 very precise missiles. It's a gun with a one bullet, and they are not going to waste this bullet, nor for Gaza, neither for Hamas. So I'm not that much worried, and of course I might be totally wrong, but I'm not that much concerned, nor about the Northern Front, neither by Iran. Now, whether the Iranians will attack Israel, at the present time, they do not have the aerial capabilities. I say directly, they hardly can touch it. If God forbid ever, they will have nuclear capabilities, they will not dare to use it against us for reasons everybody understands. So in my view, there is an issue there, much less caring the way it's. There are many good Israelis whom I know and I believe they still consider the Israeli-Palestinian issue as the most realistic concern over our national security than Iran or even Hezbollah.
Thank you. I think one final question, if I can combine a couple questions. One thing that's on my mind, given what you've shared, before this October 7th terrorist attack occurred, most people were just talking about the internal strife in Israel. The protests and the rallies, which were getting huge populations of Israel to attend. People weren't really talking as much about the external threats as the internal threats. Does that return to the surface once this ends and become, once again, the main focus of Israelis, or has this attack really changed what Israelis are most concerned about? That's number one. And number two, we're all part of University of Haifa in different ways. University of Haifa is the most diverse university in Israel. It's been a model of diversity, inclusion, pluralism, tolerance, which are all building blocks of Israel. How can University of Haifa be a model for the rest of the country, not only for other universities, but for the rest of the country going forward? Thank you.
Okay, since Netanyahu's current coalition is fully dependent on the most radical elements of Israeli politics, everybody knows it. These legal reforms, or what I used to call it the legal pogrom, was intended to serve the needs of two factions of Israeli political board, which now became a very dominant part of the coalition. It is the ultra-Orthodox Jews and the radical settlers cycles. Those two factions consider and always consider the Supreme Court as the major obstacle in fulfillment of their ideology, whether it's Medinat Halacha, namely a state ruled by the Hebrew law, or a complete annexation of Judea and Samaria. And once Mr. Netanyahu is fully dependent and politically, because his majority in the coalition is 4 people, they drove him into this mess of the judicial review. Personally, I know him for 40 years. He cares about this issue of the Supreme Court, the judge nomination, as he cares about the dark side of the moon. He was forced to start with it. And in no time, the Israeli society was torn into pieces. After 7th of October, all of a sudden, what happened here that those pilots announced their refusal to serve in the reserve, now are day and night, around the clock, bombing Gaza. All these, elite military units that their commanders and their officers took part in those massive demonstrations in Tel Aviv and with these big signs. No. Is as I said, the level of volunteering, militarily and civilly, is incredible. The so-called legal pogrom, legal reforms, of course, died in a second. The people who are behind it in the government disappeared as the rest of the government disappeared. I think this issue belongs to the previous Israel. Out of the Israel after those atrocities is going to be a different country. So I wouldn't talk about it as part of our nostalgia, but those reforms, so-called reforms, is behind us. It's done.
They're dead.
It's dead. The people who were accused by the Israeli radical right as traitors, leftists, which became the nastiest word one can spill on other, those leftists, those traitors, those Arab lovers, are the spearhead of the Israeli Defense Forces. The pilots, the commando, so it's all gone. And I wouldn't, because, again, I don't have time problems, you guys have, so I wouldn't spend even a further second about it. That's part of previous Israel.
What's the other question?
Yeah, thank you. And the second question about your view of University of Haifa.
Yeah, we are very proud in University of Haifa that about 40% of our students are Arabs, about 25% of our faculty are Arabs. Coexistence is incredibly well. Now the universities, all universities are shut down. I think that it's still mid-November or even later. And the issue with our students, as well as the Israeli Arab community, is the same. I mean, there's no. I wouldn't deal with our students as a different category. What happens about the Israeli Arabic community now is, how should I say, most of them are still in shock. Unlike me, that unfortunately, I've learned Arabic 4 years in high school, but I've completely forgot it. They do speak Arabic. And they do watch in TikTok, Telegram, all those snuff movies that comes out from Gaza. When you see people slaughtered, bodies mutilated, skeleton of burned people that the experts in these edification military center cannot separate him. They use all kind of imaging technologies, CAT scan, ultrasound to find. There's a picture running about of, I don't know how to say, two stains with apparently metal rings between them. And after the use of the most advanced, medical diagnosis systems, they found it is a skeleton of a man, of a child that were chained together and were burnt alive. So even the most politically radical Israeli Arab who see these horrifying pictures understand that what Hamas did, it's exceed any, I don't know, any acceptable rules, even of a war, of a conflict, other than this idiot, Guterres, the Secretary General, of the UN with this stupid remark that there is a background for it. I don't think there is an Israeli Arab who believes that no matter what we are doing to the Palestinians, no matter who to be blamed with the conflict, even if 100% of the situation is our party, yet nothing justifies to chain a father and a baby and to burn them alive. So they're also in shock. But, shocks has this nature that they expires sometime. And if our government will not move quickly, not on the military track, on the political track, and again, and if in the horizon there will not be the first sign of some rays of light, political speaking, I don't know what happened. At the present time, as I say, they are in shock.
Thank you for that. Everything that you're saying has been so difficult to hear, but also important to hear. And I know I learned a lot. I know our audience learned a lot. I don't know if you can see all the comments, but we've gotten dozens and dozens of comments, more questions to be answered in the future. I think we'll have to close now, given the time, but I so appreciate your time with us today.
Thank you. But if I was a bit long on a certain questions, you have to understand, I was practicing law for almost 50 years. And since we charge for a full hour after 20 minutes, an answer must be at least 20 minutes so we can charge for the hour. So
I practiced law for years too, and I remember the same thing.
It's a habit that turned into a nature. So forgive me for that.
I know, once a lawyer, always a lawyer. But we're both recovered, thank God. But thank you so much again for being with us. I know there's a lot going on for you and everyone in Israel right now. Thank you to all of our viewers and our listeners on Zoom and on Facebook Live. We have hundreds of people who are with us today. For those who'd like to rewatch this webinar or share it with anyone else, we will share that with our entire constituency after this webinar later this week. We apologize we couldn't get to every question, but maybe we'll have Dubi back with us in a future date, since he was such a great
Anytime you want to.
Thank you so much. And I hope to see you soon in Israel. Of course, that goes without saying.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Again, for those of you who are looking to give back to Israel at this time, to those who most need it, we put a link in the chat on Zoom and on Facebook Live. We will also, again, share that with our constituency. The most urgent need at University of Haifa is scholarships. Our students are already, about half of them, economically disadvantaged, and this war has put them over the edge for themselves and their families. Every donation that you give today matters. Thank you to our hundreds and hundreds of donors who already have given to us, to the emergency campaign. Thank you again to Dubi. Our thoughts and prayers are with you and with the entire people and state of Israel during this very difficult war. We hope that we win and you win, and we don't see anything like this happen ever again to our beloved homeland. Thank you again, and we hope to see you soon at a future webinar.